Some moments on live television are accidents, some are mistakes, and some are calculated. What you are about to witness is the story of a morning in Manhattan when a Hollywood icon, a man who had survived rejection, poverty, and 5 decades of Hollywood's cruelest gatekeepers, sat down at a table expecting conversation and was handed a fight instead. What happened next would freeze a studio audience in silence, send shockwaves across the internet, and expose something deeply uncomfortable about the way we treat the people we once called legends. This is the story of the day Sylvester Stallone reached his breaking point and refused, absolutely refused to stay down. New York City, early morning. The kind of gray Manhattan sky that makes everything feel like the opening shot of a film. The View studios were already humming with the organized chaos of live television. Producers with clipboards moved through narrow corridors. Camera operators checked their angles. The studio audience filed into their seats, buzzing with the low-frequency excitement of people who knew they were about to be part of something. And somewhere in a green room down the hall, Sylvester Stallone sat in a makeup chair, 77 years old. Built like a monument, quiet in the way that only people who have truly earned their silence can be quiet. An assistant hovered nearby, bright-eyed and eager. "Mr. Stallone, the ladies are so excited to have you." "It's going to be a great show." Stallone offered a polite nod, a small smile, the kind of smile that belongs to a man who has done 1,000 of these interviews, who knows exactly how they go, the warm hellos, the safe questions, the polished 30-minute dance of promotion and charm. He had no reason to expect anything different. He was wrong. What Stallone didn't know, what none of the guests ever know, is what happens in the pre-show meeting. That morning, Joy Behar had walked into the production room with an energy her colleagues noticed immediately. There was a folder in her hand, thicker than usual. There was a sharpness in her eyes that went beyond the ordinary morning edge she carried into every broadcast. "I've got some real questions for Rocky today," she said, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "It's time someone asked the tough stuff instead of just letting these guys coast on their old movies." Her co-hosts smiled the careful smiles of people who weren't entirely sure what they were, agreeing to. And no one, not the producers, not the co-hosts, not the man sitting calmly in the makeup chair, fully understood what was about to happen when those cameras went live. The View's opening theme swelled through the studio. The audience applauded. The lights came up warm and bright, the way television lights always do, making everything look friendlier than it actually is. Joy Behar smiled at the camera. Stallone smiled at the audience. And for exactly 30 seconds, it looked like every other interview on every other morning show that had ever aired. Then Joy opened her folder. "You're still making action movies at your age," she said, her tone carrying a particular kind of lightness, the kind that hides a blade. "Don't you think it's time to maybe step aside and let younger actors take over these roles?" The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples were immediate. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her chair. Sarah Haynes glanced off camera. The audience, which had been warm and applauding just moments before, settled into an uneasy quiet that didn't know where to put itself. Stallone's expression didn't break. Not yet. Decades in Hollywood had given him a professional mask so well fitted that most people couldn't see beneath it. But those who watched closely, who had seen him in 100 interviews, who knew the specific geography of his face, could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the slight shift in his jaw, the recognition of a man who understood, in that moment, that this was not going to be a friendly chat about his new film. He answered with grace. He talked about Clint Eastwood, about storytelling, about audiences who still showed up, about the idea that age was not a sentence. Joy Behar was not interested in grace. "Clint Eastwood is Clint Eastwood," she said, her voice sharpening. "And let's be honest, your recent films haven't exactly been setting the box office on fire. Isn't this more about ego than actual audience demand?" The studio audience went quiet in the particular way that people go quiet when they're witnessing something they can't categorize. Not angry yet, not entertained yet, just still, waiting. Stallone remained measured. He cited the Expendables franchise. He spoke about Creed, about giving Rocky Balboa to a new generation through Michael B. Jordan's story. He was calm, logical, professional. But Joy pushed harder. Wasn't Creed really Michael B. Jordan's movie? I mean, you were basically just there for nostalgia value, right? Playing the same character you created 40 years ago. Whoopi Goldberg leaned in gently. A lifeline. I think what we're all curious about is how Sly keeps himself in such incredible shape. Joy cut her off. She wasn't interested in lifelines. She had locked on to something and she wasn't letting go. Something in her demeanor had shifted from pointed to predatory, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for anyone in the room or at home to understand exactly why. Hollywood has this problem. Joy continued, her voice rising with an almost righteous energy, with aging male stars who just can't accept that their time has passed. They keep coming back to the same well over and over again instead of making room for fresh talent. Stallone's hands, clasped on the table since the beginning of the interview, tightened, barely visible. But there, Joy, he said, his voice still controlled, still carrying the careful weight of a man choosing every word with precision. I didn't get handed anything in this business. I wrote Rocky because nobody would give me a shot. I sold my dog to pay rent while I was trying to get that script made. He paused. Let that land. When the studios wanted to buy it, they wanted to cast somebody else, somebody more established, somebody who fit their idea of what a leading man should look like. I fought for years for the right to play the character I created. The audience stirred. There was something in that story, something in the specific lived texture of it, that reached across the studio and touched something real. Joy wasn't moved. But that was 50 years ago, she said. What have you done lately besides recycle the same character over and over? The studio went dead silent. Not the polite silence of people being considerate. The held breath silence of people watching something dangerous approach. There is a specific look that crosses a person's face in the moment they decide they are done being polite. It is not anger exactly. It is something older and heavier than anger. It is the look of a lifetime of patience running out, of years of swallowed frustration finally reaching the surface, of a man who has been knocked down so many times that he has developed an almost preternatural ability to absorb impact, finally deciding he will not absorb this one. The cameras caught it perfectly. Every frame of it. What have I done lately? Stallone repeated. And his voice was different now. Quiet, in the way a storm is quiet in the second before it breaks. I've created opportunities for dozens of actors through the Expendables franchise. I've mentored young directors and writers. I've used my platform to tell stories about working class heroes and underdogs who refuse to give up. All starring you, of course, Joy said, and she laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, a dismissal disguised as amusement. And that was the moment. That exact moment. The laugh. Stallone's eyes changed. The professional mask, the one that had served him faithfully for 5 decades of interviews, criticism, and Hollywood's cruelest indignities, finally slipped. And what was underneath it was not rage, not theatrics, not the performance of a man playing tough. It was something far more powerful than that. It was truth. You know what, Joy? His voice dropped to a register the studio had never heard from him before. Quiet but absolute. The kind of quiet that fills a room completely. I've been sitting here trying to be polite, trying to play the game. But I think you got some kind of personal problem with me that has nothing to do with movies or representation or any of the high-minded principles you're pretending to care about. Joy's eyes widened, just slightly, the first crack in her own composure. I don't have a personal problem with you. I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked. No. Stallone leaned forward, his gaze fixed and unflinching. You're not asking questions. You're making accusations. You're sitting there acting like I'm some kind of relic who should just disappear so you can feel better about whatever agenda you're pushing this week. The other co-hosts had gone completely still. Sarah Haynes was staring at the table. Alyssa Farah Griffin was looking helplessly toward the producers. Even Whoopi Goldberg, unshakable, seen it all Whoopi, looked like she was watching something she didn't know how to stop. That's not what I said, Joy insisted, but her voice had changed. The aggressive confidence of the last 15 minutes had developed a tremor in it, small but audible to anyone paying attention. It's exactly what you said. Stallone's eyes didn't move from her face. You question my right to make movies. You question my motives. You suggested I'm taking opportunities away from other people by continuing to work in the industry I helped build. And you did it all with this smug attitude, like you're some kind of moral authority on who deserves success and who doesn't. He paused. The pause of a man who has more to say. Much more. Joy tried to recover. She straightened in her chair. She reached back for the tone she had started with, confident, prosecutorial, in control. Look sly, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Maybe this is just what happens when people get older and more sensitive. You can't handle a little criticism like you used to. Maybe that's another sign that it's time to step back. The words hit the studio like a physical force. The co hosts actually recoiled. Even the camera operators, trained to be invisible, seemed to register the impact. An audience member in the front row visibly flinched. For one long, suspended second, Stallone went completely still. The cameras caught his face cycling through something complex and human, something that acting classes cannot teach, and that no script can reproduce. The full weight of the moment, the accumulation of everything, every rejection, every dismissal, every person who had ever told him he wasn't good enough, wasn't the right type, didn't belong, pressing against the inside of this one, specific, crystalline second. And then he erupted. He rose from his chair with a speed that startled the entire room, his hands hitting the table with a sound that cut through the studio like a gunshot. Constructive criticism? His voice filled every corner of the space. You think what you've been doing for the last 15 minutes is constructive criticism? The audience gasped. The cameras kept rolling. What followed was not a celebrity tantrum. It was not manufactured drama for the sake of television. What it was, what every person in that studio felt in real time, and what millions of viewers would feel when they watched the clip later that day, was a reckoning. A man standing up and refusing, for the first time in a very long time, to sit quietly while someone rewrote the story of his life. I'm 77 years old, Stallone said, his voice building with each word, each sentence finding its footing like a man who has been running uphill for 50 years and has finally reached level ground. I've been in this business since before you knew what a television camera was. I've taken more real criticism, more real rejection, more real hits than you could imagine. Joy tried to interject. He did not let her. No, you had your 15 minutes to tear me down. Now you're going to sit there and listen. And she did. The entire studio did. You want to talk about Rocky? About recycling characters? When I wrote Rocky, I was a struggling actor from Philadelphia who couldn't get arrested in this town. I said no to the studios. I fought for 2 years to play that character. They told me I was crazy, that I'd never work again. But I believed in that story because working class people deserve to see themselves as heroes on screen. That is diversity, Joy. That is representation. His voice cracked slightly on those last words, not from weakness, from weight, the weight of everything he meant. Rocky Balboa wasn't some privileged pretty boy. He was a bum from South Philly who refused to stay down when life knocked him flat. And I don't know how many times I have to keep proving that I understand that story because I've been living it. The studio had reached a kind of absolute silence that live television almost never achieves. A silence so complete that the hum of the camera equipment was audible. A silence that felt like the whole room was leaning forward. Stallone looked directly into the lens. Not at Joy, not at the other hosts, at the camera, at the people watching at home on their couches and their phones and their kitchen televisions, the ordinary people, the working class people, the people who'd grown up watching Rocky get back up off the canvas and seen something of themselves in that battered, beautiful stubbornness. To everyone watching, he said, his voice now controlled and clear, I came here today to talk about work I'm passionate about, stories I believe in, characters that have meant something to people for generations. He paused. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who seems to think success is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. He turned back to Joy one final time. You want to know about making room for new talent? I've spent my own money developing young filmmakers. I've greenlit projects studios wouldn't touch. I've spent 30 years giving people their first shot. But apparently none of that matters, because what you actually came here today to do was play the role of the righteous crusader. Even if that means tearing down someone who came from nothing and worked his entire life to build something real. He stood. He removed his microphone, with the deliberate precision of a man who has made his final point and knows it. I'm done here. This isn't journalism, it's ambush television. And Sylvester Stallone walked off the set of The View. The cameras kept rolling on the table he left behind, on Joy's expression, stunned, frozen, stripped of the confidence she had walked in with, on the other co host sitting in the particular kind of silence that comes after something irreversible has just happened. No one moved for a long moment. Because what do you do after that? What do you say? In the hours that followed, the clip spread across the internet with the velocity that only truly extraordinary moments achieve. Not because it was shocking for the sake of shock, not because a celebrity had lost his temper, but because something in it felt true, because millions of people watching recognized something in Stallone's voice in those final minutes, the sound of someone who had spent a lifetime being told what he was worth and had finally, publicly, irrevocably, decided he was done agreeing. There is a line in Rocky, a line that Stallone wrote himself, alone, in a borrowed apartment in New York in 3 days, when he was broke and unknown and utterly out of options. Rocky says to his trainer Mickey, I just want to go the distance. Not win, not be celebrated, not be handed anything, just go the distance. And whatever you believe about what happened on that stage, whether Joy Behar was asking legitimate questions or waging a personal campaign, whether Stallone responded appropriately or crossed a line of his own, what is undeniable is this: the man has gone the distance, 50 years of it. And on a Tuesday morning in a Manhattan television studio, with the cameras rolling and the whole world watching, he stood up from a table where someone had tried to count him out. And he walked out on his own terms. Just like Rocky always did.